Hello and welcome to Kelly's Wordy Reactions. So, this write up from a website by the name of AmericanProgress.org came out in October of 2024. And I want to go through it. It's very long, so I may have to do this in parts as well. But but I want to get into this too. So I was reading from another piece that I found on Project 2025 earlier today, and I'm going to continue with that one as well. But I wanted to get into this one because it kind of explains um, a lot about. It explains a lot about Project 2025, in other words. So let's go ahead and get into it. Okay, so this is entitled Project 2025 Would Destroy the U.S. System of Checks and Balances and Create an Imperial Presidency. And like I said, this was back before the election. So let's see what they have to say. And again, this is from the website AmericanProgress.org. All right, far right extremists have a plan to shatter democracy's guardrails, giving presidents almost unlimited power to implement policies that will hurt everyday Americans and strip them of fundamental rights. Okay, this report is part of a series from the Center for American Progress exposing how the sweeping Project 2025 policy agenda would harm all Americans. This new authoritarian playbook, published by the Heritage Foundation, would destroy the 250-year-old system of checks and balances upon which U.S. democracy has relied and given far right and give far right politicians, judges, and corporations more control over Americans' lives. Let me see what's over here. So basically, this is a playbook for um, any far right conservative um, president that they would essentially help to get put into office. Um, and so now, of course, we know that we have President Donald Trump that's there now, and who, according to myself and a lot of other people, seems to be pretty much running with this playbook. He has some of the authors of it, or people that helped to write it, actually in his administration now. So let's go further. Introduction and summary. With American democracy already at a crisis point, extreme right wing operatives have crafted an authoritarian playbook that would push it over the edge, destroying the nation's 250-year-old bedrock system of checks and balances to create an imperial presidency. The Project 2025 mandate for leadership is a 920-page roadmap for a future president to wield excessive power, to implement a dangerous policy agenda, ripping out democracy by its roots and replacing it with a system that most Americans would find unthinkable. For many decades, there have been efforts to advance radical proposals to weaken America's middle class, stripping them of fundamental freedoms and subverting the rule of law, most notably by capturing the U.S. Supreme Court. But the Project 2025 blueprint makes those prior efforts look quaint. Project 2025 unabashedly promotes the wholesale violation of norms and laws, consolidating enormous power in a president and trampling on Congress' constitutional role to take away Americans' long cherished freedoms and opportunities. Not only would this authoritarian playbook make it easier for a far right executive branch to weaken the independence of public agencies, install political cronies throughout the government, punish people it disagrees with, and control what news and media can report. But it would also allow the government to eliminate abortion access, healthcare choices, overtime pay, educational opportunities, and countless other programs that benefit communities and families. Quite simply, if Project 2025 is implemented, the United States would be unrecognizable. Instead, it would resemble autocracies around the world, such as Hungary and Turkey, which in recent years have severely weakened their democracies and vested inordinate power in authoritarian leaders who serve the interest of themselves. It doesn't make sense to me, but let's go at it again. Okay, quite simply, if Project 2025 is implemented, the United States would be unrecognizable. Instead, it would resemble autocracies around the world, such as Hungary and Turkey, which in recent years have severely weakened their democracies and vested inordinate power in authoritarian leaders who serve the interest of themselves, not the public. Okay, I see what they're saying now. Once this backsliding occurs, it is incredibly difficult to fix. Make no, and I've already been hearing people say that so many things about what's already happened um, to date, even if you stopped and started fixing them now, would be really difficult to fix. Let me go further. Make no mistake, this could easily happen in the United States without a firm system of checks and balances. Ominously, the Heritage Foundation, which created Project 2025 and its president declared in July 2024 that they are in the process of the Second American Revolution and suggested that political violence may be necessary to effectuate their authoritarian blueprint if Americans resist. If Project 2025 is implemented, the United States would be unrecognizable. Instead, it would resemble autocracies around the world. This report first discusses the background and draconian goals of Project 2025. It then explains how the plan's extreme ideas could come to fruition, exploring 7 critical guardrails that Project 2025 would demolish, including weaponizing the Department of Justice against political opponents and everyday Americans, politicizing independent agencies and executive branch departments, and replacing tens of thousands of nonpartisan civil servants with loyalists to do the president's bidding. In each instance, this report provides concrete examples of the direct harms that would result from eliminating these crucial guardrails. Background, basic facts about Project 2025. Okay, let me pause for a moment. Okay. Project 2025 provides a plausible pathway for a far right administration. All right. Based on white Christian nationalist, pro corporate, and anti worker philosophy to degrade democracy and promote radical policy goals it has long wanted to accomplish but has not yet been able to implement. The authoritarian roadmap of this shrinking political minority aims to tear down the system of checks and balances and reimagine an executive branch on steroids. Excuse me. Um, okay, and reimagine an executive branch on steroids and free from any shackles, giving the president and judges they put in place unfettered power to take over the country and control Americans' lives. In the process, the plan redefines personal autonomy and freedom, conjuring up the worst of European nationalism from the 1930s. Project 2025 would hurt all Americans, but in abandoning the public interest, it would allow the most dangerous attacks to be aimed at young people, the poor, and other marginalized communities who have a particular interest in creating a government that works for the people. As the Center for American Progress has discussed in a series of recent articles, Project 2025 is a 920-page manifesto spearheaded by spearheaded and published by the Heritage Foundation, a far-right think tank that has influenced conservative administrations since the 1980s. Let's go over that again. As the Center for American Progress has discussed in a series of recent articles, Project 2025 is a 920-page manifesto spearheaded and published by the Heritage Foundation, a far right think tank that has influenced conservative administrations since the 1980s. So, I know that you heard me, but the takeaway there is um, that this machine has been influencing certain things on the conservative side since the 1980s. Among other things, the expansive plan would eliminate fundamental personal freedoms while cutting the take home pay of millions of Americans. Wow. Let's just read that again. Among other things, the expansive plan would eliminate fundamental personal freedoms while cutting the take home pay of millions of Americans, increase taxes in the middle class, allow corporations to stop paying workers overtime, implement um, well, I don't want to keep saying that word on the platform, but ABOR ban, restrict access to contraception slash education funding, and raise the retirement age for Social Security. Although these policies are unpopular, Project 2025 would make it even harder for the American people to have a say in their government or oppose policies they disagree with. Hmm. And when I read, among other things, the expansive plan would eliminate fundamental personal freedoms while cutting the take home pay of millions, and then this part right here, increase taxes, that just shoots me to thinking about the tariffs because um, it's just so funny the way that um, they're being talked about as far as from the executive branch and their media, um, as if it's just going to be this great thing when actually it is just more, just um, consumers paying more, which basically is a way of increasing our taxes and cutting the amount of money that we have. So, more money goes to corporations and paying for things, which makes us have less money. Um, so, yeah. Let's see, where did I leave off? Okay, the Project 2025 blueprint is one of four pillars of a larger plan overseen by the Heritage Foundation. The other three pillars include a personnel database of loyalists to potentially replace tens of thousands of federal government civil servants, a private online educational tool to train them, and an unpublished 120-day playbook with transition plans for each federal agency. The so what is we're in around about what, how many days into this presidency? 60 or so. So it says, and an unpublished 180-day playbook with transition plans for each federal agency. The Heritage Foundation aims to include 20,000 people in the database. It is already taking its recruitment efforts on the road across the nation. When acting together, the four pillars are designed to grease the wheels for a new far right administration to quickly start accomplishing a president's radical agenda. The tentacles of the larger project are sweeping. It bills itself as a movement wide effort guided by the conservative cause. That is unparalleled in the history of the conservative movement in its size and scope. Paul Dans, former director of Project 2025, confirmed, never before has the entire movement banded together to construct a comprehensive plan to deconstruct the out of touch administrative state. Heritage Foundation President Kevin Roberts boasted that his apparatus is orders of magnitude bigger than anything similar done before. In fact, he called it part of the Second American Revolution, which he ominously threatened will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be. The coordinated effort to enshrine U.S. authoritarianism is steered by more than 100 plugged in conservative organizations that make up the advisory board, and more than 400 people reportedly helped fashion the Project 2025 playbook. Let's read that again. The coordinated effort to enshrine U.S. authoritarianism is steered by more than 100 plugged in conservative organizations that make up the advisory board, and more than 400 people reportedly helped fashion the Project 2025 playbook. One key role is held by Russell Vogt, a self described Christian nationalist who runs the Center for Renewing America, which reportedly is secretly drafting hundreds of executive orders, regulations, and memos that would lay the groundwork for rapid action for a future right for a future far right president. Another contributor is Stephen Miller, who runs America First Legal, and has long espoused weakening the system of checks and balances, along with authoritarian policies, including rounding up and deporting millions of immigrants. Miller subsequently attempted to distance himself from Project 2025. Project 2025 co authors also include far right stalwarts such as Ben Carson, Ken Mussolini, and Peter Navarro, who recently served jail time for defying a lawful subpoena related to aiding the attempt to overturn the 2020 presidential election results. All the aforementioned people held prominent positions in the administration of President Donald Trump. The larger Project 2025 effort draws funding from a secretive, dark money network that includes organizations overseen by the far right Koch brothers, as well as Leonard Leo, who engineered the far right hijacking of the Supreme Court. These deep pocketed funders have worked hand in hand for decades with extreme politicians and other allies to weaken the nation's system of checks and balances in order to hold on to political power and implement a white, Christian, nationalist, corporatist agenda, even as the nation is becoming more diverse and pluralistic. No doubt they have achieved some degree of success. In two of the past six presidential elections, the United States elected a conservative president who did not win the most popular votes nationwide, but won enough votes in the counter majoritarian electoral college. The far right has also recently captured the U.S. Supreme Court, making a mockery of the rule of law, equal justice, and protection of fundamental rights. The court's extremist justices now routinely substitute their partisan agendas for laws passed by elected members of Congress or even the plain meaning of the Constitution, ignoring the court's long-standing precedents, adding new roadblocks for public agencies to keep Americans safe, and seemingly doing the bidding of billionaires or special interests, taking them on lavish vacations. And just as Congress has become disempowered by the Supreme Court, it has also been paralyzed by extremist lawmakers who are elected in unfairly gerrymandered districts and who abuse the anti majoritarian Senate filibuster rules, which empower senators from the 21 least populous states, representing only 11% of the country's population and only 7% of its Black population, to block almost any people powered legislation. Moving on, Project 2025 takes an abolitionist view of presidential authority. No, I'm trying to put two words together. Absolutist. Project 2025 takes an absolutist view of presidential authority. Okay, sorry about that. To wholly reshape the government in ways that most Americans would think is impossible, the Project 2025 blueprint anchors itself in the unitary executive theory. This radical governing philosophy, which contravenes the traditional separation of powers, vests presidents with almost complete control over the federal bureaucracy, including congressionally designated independent agencies or the DOJ, Department of Justice, and the FBI. The unitary executive theory is designed to sharply diminish Congress' imperative role to act as a check and balance on the executive branch, with tools such as setting up independent agencies to make expert decisions and by limiting presidents' ability to fire career civil servants for purely political purposes. The roadmap to autocracy presented in Project 2025 extends far beyond the unitary executive theory, first promoted by President Ronald Reagan and later espoused by Vice President Dick Cheney, largely designed to implement a deregulatory corporatist agenda. Instead of Instead, as discussed further below, Project 2025 presents a maximalist version that does not nibble around the edges but aims to thoroughly demolish the traditional guardrails that allow Congress an equal say in how democracy functions or what policies are implemented. One noted expert at the conservative think tank American Enterprise Institute, Philip Wallach, said some of these visions, let me pull up on this so I can read it better. Some of these visions start to just bleed into some kind of authoritarian fantasies where the president won the election, so he's in charge. So everyone has to do what he says, and that's just not the system, the government we live under. If Congress is robbed of its imperative role as a check and balance on the president's power, then the judicial branch is willing to bestow a president with almost unlimited authority. Autocracy results. And presidents become strongman rulers, free to choose which laws to enforce, which long-standing norms to jettison, and how to impose their will on every executive branch department and agency. Project 2025 would demolish political norms on which U.S. democracy lies. Governance of U.S. democracy is anchored not just in laws, but more importantly, in norms. Norms often are about showing political restraint, accepting the legitimacy of an opposing party that won elections, and negotiating with opponents, even when partisan actors' preferred results are not reached. The dangers of norm breaking can be enormous for the rule of law. While often espousing disturbing views on the purported role of government, recent generations of elected conservatives have not advocated radically reinterpreting well established laws and upsetting age old political norms that respect checks and balances. But Project 2025 unabashedly breaks that essential barrier in its quest to create an imperial presidency and gives politicians, judges, and corporations power over everyday Americans. When elected leaders have no loyalty to traditional pro democracy norms, they become unshackled to bend the government to their political will. Let's read that again. When elected leaders have no loyalty to traditional pro democracy norms, They become unshackled to bend the government to their political will. And let me just state it one more time, or let me state it again, that this article from the AmericanProgress.org website was written October 1st, 2024. Okay. When elected leaders have no loyalty to traditional pro democracy norms, they become unshackled to bend the government to their political will. Such leaders may try to stop the peaceful transfer of power. Hmm, seen that before. Um, ask for loyalty from the FBI, attempt to bully the news media into submission, threaten to misuse the military to silence dissenters, assail judges who stand in the way of their agendas, circumvent Congress to divert federal funds to pet projects, and allow corruption, nepotism, and conflicts of interest to flourish. When well accepted norms are shattered, checks and balances and democracy can backslide. I think this is the most powerful thing I've read. All right. The judicial branch would not function as a reliable check on executive branch power. Let me see how. Okay. If a future far right administration were to seize as much power as possible under the Project 2025 blueprint, Americans simply could not count on the federal judiciary as a viable check and balance on the president. In fact, a number of justices who currently sit on the Supreme Court have shown that they have become captured by the far right and will play constitutional hardball on its behalf. In the past several years, the Supreme Court has lurched sharply rightward, now controlled by six extreme justices whose judicial philosophy often seems dictated by what would most empower the radically conservative, pro corporate, pro Christian agenda, even where it destroys traditional checks and balances through the clawing back of laws, precedents, and long cherished rights. As addressed in several CAP articles, the unelected justices on the High Court increasingly jettison precedent when necessary to reach their preferred policy results, kneecapping the rule of law, legal accountability, equal justice, and the protection of fundamental freedoms such as abortion, access, and voting rights. In other words, putting power over reason. In just the past few months, In just the past few months, the Supreme Court's far right majority rendered a democracy shaking decision that perilously places presidents above the law for the first time in American history. The High Court effectively rewrote the American Constitution by deciding that presidents are largely immune from criminal prosecution and therefore unaccountable if they break the law while carrying out official acts. This is a stunning display of deference to presidents and the unitary executive theory, bestowing upon them king like powers, with the Supreme Court giving itself the authority to review any future prosecution of a president who will inevitably claim immunity from accountability. With this lamentable decision, Congress will lose much of its ability to check the president's power under Article 2 of the Constitution. Is it Article 2? of the Constitution when he ignores criminal laws while allegedly carrying out his constitutional duties, all of which threatens Americans' fundamental rights. The Supreme Court seemingly has left only one remedy for Congress to try to constrain presidents: impeachment and removal. But in the current political environment, the removal of a president, which requires a two-thirds supermajority in the Senate after a House impeachment vote, is nearly impossible. Yet there is more. And I'm going to stop right there for today. And I'll be back to continue on with this in a part 2. All right. So I want to thank you so much for stopping by, and I will see you on the next one. Bye.